How's it going, everybody? This is Luke from Coffee House, and you may be asking yourself, Luke, why are you reviewing professional audio equipment? But before I show you what this does in coffee, let me explain what this does in its regular environment. Picture this, you're rummaging through old records in your house and you dig one up. You blow off the dust and it's Alice Coltrane's Universal Consciousness. And you pull it out of the sleeve and you see that the sleeve grabs a little bit, a little staticky, a little old, a little dusty, but you throw it on the turntable anyways. Once you let that needle drop, you get a staticky, really rough kind of sound like this. And that sound is probably very familiar to a lot of people, not only in the vinyl world, but just in general, you hear it a lot in music. And what we're hearing there is a variation of static, of dust, of other related debris, and this is to help remove that. From the Milty website is this description. This amazing little device, known as the Zerostat anti-static gun, is an anti-static generator, which has numerous applications. Just squeeze the trigger of the Zerostat and a steady stream of ions are released. The magic comes from two powerful piezoelectric crystals and a patented compression trigger. Originally developed for removing dust from vinyl, there have been many new adaptations to using this. Each Zerostat has a 2-cycle operation, which is the trigger is being squeezed, positive ions are being flowed out of the gun, and when you release the trigger, negative ions are flowing out. This means that it's possible to induce a charge on a neutral surface using the Zerostat. If the trigger is squeezed and the Zerostat is removed from the surface, allowing the trigger to return to its original position, a positive charge will be induced. Similarly, pointing the Zerostat at the surface only for the release of the trigger, like so, will induce a negative charge. So now with all of this information, you may still be asking yourself, what does this have to do with coffee? And it actually has quite a lot to do with coffee. As many of you may know, grinder static is an ever-present issue, not only in cheap grinders, but grinders as expensive as this. This is the Weber EG1, a $4,300 home grinder that still has very, very distinct static issues like most grinders do. So what does Weber do to counteract the static with their EG1? Well, they send you this little amber glass bottle here. What you do with this is fill this with water and go ahead and just remove that cap, spray it on your beans. This technique is called RDT, or the Ross Droplet technique. RDT has been a mainstay in the home coffee industry for about the last 10 years or so. It's really kind of picked up in the last 5. But what we're seeing on the commercial side is there's a lot of mechanical fixes to alleviate flyaways and other static. The Mahlkönig E65S, for example, a very, very popular commercial grinder, uses a thing called a flapper, which is a little bit of a rubber acrylic type piece that's standing in the way of your coffee grounds with a metal fork, and it's properly spitting those coffee grounds out so that they're not flying everywhere. Having that little bit of blockage allows for coffee to evenly flow out of the coffee grinder and not just fly chaff everywhere. And outside of mechanical solutions, we're seeing a lot of electronic solutions as well, especially in the home industry. This is starting to happen more and more. If you look at like the Fellow O Gen 2, the Fellow O Gen 2 has anti-static technology, which is an actual deionizer built into the coffee grinder. So when you're running that coffee, you're actually not getting a lot of flyaways when compared to maybe the Fellow O Gen 1, which didn't have it. Fellow's actually adopted it quite a bit. If you look at their Fellow O Gen 2 and the Opus grinder, those both have great anti-static tech, which is almost removing the need for RDT. Before RDT was kind of widely adopted, in the commercial environment, we were told by not only manuals and tech seminars and everything like that, not to allow moisture into your grinders, because moisture is bad for the burrs, it will cause them to rust and everything like that. So in our training classes, when we were training people, we would tell people the same thing. Avoid putting any level of moisture inside of your burr set, which that was a pretty common thing, and it made a lot of sense being untreated metal burrs inside of a coffee grinder. So this begs the question, is deionization the next step? Well, Akaya seems to think so. Akaya, the very well-known scale company, recently had come out with a coffee grinder called the Akaya Orbit, which, if you've seen this before and you've seen the Orbit, they very much share a lot of characteristics in terms of the physical nature of these. Both flat burrs, both at this same angle, and Weber definitely influenced the design. We actually had an Orbit here in the office, and I did like it, but there was a lot of static involved. So what did Akaya do? They actually came out with a new product. Akaya, earlier this year at the Specialty Coffee Association Expo, SCA, they released their Ion Beam. And the Akaya Ion Beam is an app-controlled deionizer that you can actually set next to a grinder, right kind of below where the coffee is actually feeding out. And what it will do is introduce negative ions and push out positive ions in the back. I think more or less it's a valid introduction into pushing coffee grinder manufacturers into using a level of deionization in their coffee grinders. The orbit's really actually nice. There's a nice slider in the app where you can connect it and then adjust the sensitivity or the intensity of the ions. Negative ions will be pushing out and positive ions will be pushing in. I'll have a little video here so you can watch it. But also one of the designers actually instructed me that in the instances of some dark coffees, what you're actually doing is introducing positive ions. So you can just turn that device around and it'll do the same thing. The device is charged by a USB-C, very easy, and it is app controlled, which personally I don't love. I feel like everything in Akaya's ecosystem is app controlled, but I don't really use a lot of the apps for those things. So now I'm still here holding this little blue gun and I still haven't shown you what it does. So let's go ahead, unbox this. I'll show you what's inside of the box. There's just one little thing, but it's good to know what it does. And then we'll do some demonstrations on how it works and we'll go from there. Okay, so what you have here is the most like early 2000s, 90s looking box here. And this is what the gun comes in. It's weird to call it a gun, but I mean, it is shaped like one and it also says the pistol that neutralizes static on the box. So this is the box. And inside of the box, what you get is this. You get the gun and this little attachment right here. What that does is it essentially just shows you that the gun is working. So take this little piece on here, plug it in there, and then you can click it like that, and it'll light up, and you'll actually be able to see that the gun is producing a charge. But you don't use that when you're actually using the gun. What you're gonna do is click down for positive ions and release for negative ions. In the instance of coffee grinding, what we're gonna do is actually point away the gun, click it, and then hold it down. And once it starts grinding, we're gonna slowly release that trigger, and it's gonna be pulling the ions away. So what you can do is you can actually hear it, which is really weird, and you can almost feel like a rush of air. Kind of freaks me out, but that is how it goes. So with the EG1 here, what I've done is selected 2 on here, which for us in the office is our pour over setting. And what I'm gonna do first is weigh out 21 grams of coffee and just run a regular pour over dose. I'm gonna do no RDT, I'm gonna do no anti-static technology, I'm just gonna let it rip. And as you can see, clearly we're producing a huge amount of static, something that is almost completely unusable. It makes me feel like I need some type of higher vessel, something that's enclosed almost fully to avoid static and flyaways getting everywhere. And I know there will be some people who are saying, oh, well, the EG1 comes with a higher vessel, but in the interest of demonstrating how much static is produced by this, we're using these lower Barista Hustle cupping cups to show that. Next, what we're gonna do is use RDT, which of course is a really amazing fix to the coffee grinder here. Same grind, same dose, same cup, everything like that, but just one little spray into the coffee beans, we mix those up and then pour those into the top, and this is what we're left with. Almost zero static entirely, which is really, really amazing to see. And lastly, what we're gonna be doing is using the Zerostat here. And we're gonna be using no RDT for this. I'm only going to be putting in dry beans up top, pulling this trigger away from the grinder, pressing the grind on, and then slowly releasing this trigger. And so as you can see here, I point away for a little bit, click it, and then release it again. That's just because I'm out of trigger space here, so I need to go ahead and charge that gun again. So I'm introducing negative ions and essentially neutralizing the grinds that are coming out. And as you can see, RDT is clearly amazing, but what's so interesting to me is that the gun is also really, really good at deionizing the static charge that's coming out of this coffee. And these guns are pretty expensive, about $100, where the ion beam from Akaya is $150, but $100 is still pretty expensive. Depending on where you find them, you can find them for more or less, but I went ahead and did send up a level of distribution if we were interested in carrying these in the store. So if you are interested in one of these, leave a comment down below and I can definitely set that up. We can get that going. But would you do this? Would you spend $100 over the cost of an RDT tool, which is maybe $1? I don't know. Personally, I don't even know if I would buy one of these for my home, but I definitely think it's worth a longer conversation. I think what we're doing here at the end of the day is demonstrating the viability of anti-static technology in coffee grinders. For me, I've always seen RDT as more or less a band-aid solution for what I think is a larger issue, where coffee grinders are really not doing what home users are actually asking them to do. Specifically in the home environment, obviously this has commercial applications as well, but in the home environment, the last thing I want to be doing is sweeping and air blowing coffee grounds from every crevice of my kitchen. So maybe it's the old school tech in me talking, but the idea of introducing moisture into a burr set, I really don't love it. They're not stainless steel, obviously, but they are high carbon steel. And high carbon steel, like a D2 tool steel, is really great at retaining a sharp edge. But what they do is rust. So when you're introducing moisture here, obviously the burrs are going to oxidize quite a bit. And I know that rust isn't toxic technically, and I know that it's not going to seriously affect the flavor of your coffee, but just the idea of introducing moisture in there and degrading the burrs from that water does scare me a little bit. Obviously, the amount of water that we're introducing into the burrs is negligible, but I think any little bit is still moving away from what is, I think, a better solution. So here we are. I think at the end of the day, RDT is going to hang around for quite a bit. It's a cheap and easy fix to a huge problem that I think we have in the home grinder world, but this, I think, opens up the conversation for what does the future look like in anti-static technology for coffee grinders, and I think it's entirely attainable. I didn't really find a lot of information about this in the coffee world aside from a couple forums when I first discovered this, but I think it's a really great application to be able to help get away from that mindset of adding water to your burrs, but also get into the mindset of still having a clean cup. I love the idea of finding new ways to improve my coffee grinding workflow, especially using tools that have been commonplace in adjacent industries, and this Milty is no exception. I still think we're in our infancy when it comes to amazing home grinders, and you've seen a huge boom as of recent. So many different grinders coming out in so little time, but what we're not seeing yet is serious leaps in terms of technology. That said, we're seeing great strides in the industry for the home world in general, and I'm excited to see what this looks like going forward. And that's about everything I have for you. I wanted this video to be, one, a highlight of something that I found that was not used in the coffee industry, aside from a couple different mentions here and there, but definitely opens up the floor for a larger conversation. I've seen a lot of emphasis in RDT for home grinders, but we're seeing an emerging emphasis on anti-static technology, which I think is where the true answer kind of lies in the home grinder world. This little guy right here, I think is maybe step 1 of 1,000 to where we're actually starting to see this implemented properly in grinders, but shout out to Fellow for doing such a good job so early on. That's everything I have for you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Luke from Coffee House, and we'll see you next time. Just like something like that? No, that looks like blurred out.